Well, joining us now for an update on the bitter cold temperatures, the snow that we've seen in parts of the country, and what lies ahead here for this next week and really the back half of the month of January. We're also going to take a look at what's happening in South America. Eric Snodgrass with Nutrient Ag Solutions joins us here on the program again this week. Eric, good to talk to you. And man, oh man, I know a lot of folks are freezing. It is extremely cold across pretty much the entire middle portion of the U.S. between the Rockies and the Appalachian Mountains. So I guess just start with what we've been seeing before we talk about when this cold may finally get out of here for most of us. It's been a wild weather week, hasn't it, Eric?
It has. And every time this happens, there's always a clue or a precursor. And it usually starts either Greenland or Alaska. So at the end of December, we finally saw the cold air that was in Greenland, Alaska get displaced. And it just stored up in Western Canada. And it finally let out last week. And it's just diving all the way down into the southeast. And we still have two more rounds of cold air, the one today. And then there's another big high pressure cell that's coming in late this week. So for like Thursday, Friday, Saturday. And we do expect it to go mild after that. Why? Because all the cold air is going back to Alaska and back to Greenland, and the jet stream is starting to line itself back out rather than being really high amplitude. But what it did was it created, two substantially large winter storms in the Midwest, and then one that just came in over the last couple of days. It hit the Mid-South, hammering some areas with snow like they normally don't see, and it shut down parts of the Mid-South. And remember, there was ice south of that. That same storm system is going up the East Coast today, but it's not a big, deep low that's curled up. It's more just overrunning on the edge of this really, really Arctic and cold air. About the only place that there isn't cold air across the country is honestly where I am. I'm in Phoenix today, and I'm taking this off as soon as we're done because it's mild down here. And it's about the only spot that still remains warm. In fact, I looked this morning. Arizona is the only state without some sort of a weather advisory watch or warning. We've got an ice storm in the Northwest. We've got the wind chill watches and advisories in the midsection of the country. Still a winter storm east, and so still active go of it here in the near term. But here's the bigger picture thing with all of this. All of this nastiness in winter has brought in moisture, and I can't complain. Because as we do warm up next week and we start to melt this snow, guess where it's going to go straight into the soil, because the soils weren't cold before a lot of the snow came in. So there's up to 2.5 inches of liquid in Iowa right now. And given that state over the last 4 years has more than 40 inches in deficit in spots, they need every drop of this. So there is some good to be had with all of this. As the mild air comes back in, the snow begins to melt. We get to keep it. We don't have to let it all run off. We get to keep a lot of it in our soil kind of system. So Mississippi's up 14 feet above low stage. I mean, there's so many things that were positive about all of this that we can't ignore, even though it was quite unpleasant.
Yeah, quite unpleasant now, but as you said, things that are definitely a benefit moving forward as we think about spring planting. I know, still a little ways to go, but we got some ideas on that we're going to get to here in just a minute. But overall, very cold here in the U.S. Folks having to bundle up. I know it's tough not only on humans, it's tough on livestock too when you get these bitter cold temperatures, Eric.
It is. And I saw some, there's some guys that are doing, what they call winter or spring calving right now. So if you
Yeah.
imagine your first taste of life on this planet is wind chills of -50. There's some of that going on in Montana last week, and then still some really brutally cold air this week. So yeah, it's a bit of a rough go, but you'll actually talk to a lot of guys in livestock who most of them have the capability of
Yeah.
keeping the cattle warm, and they're more happy than anything because they're no longer standing in muck, just muddy. It's all froze. It's a much better condition for the livestock. So it's one or the other, right? And
Yeah. It's a
it's
give or
tough.
take. Yeah,
That's
it's
right.
tough, but it's a give or take. That's for sure. That's for sure. Let's talk South America real quick before we talk a little more long range here. I know we're getting on the cusp of harvesting in Brazil for soybeans, getting ready to plant the safrita corn crop. A lot of eyes on South America. We continue to see production cuts being made by various forecasting agencies and private groups, etc. So, what is this weather situation looking like here as we get to mid-January and get to the early part of soybean harvest in Brazil?
Yeah. So why don't we do this real quick review of what happened, right? So October, November, December, driest on record for northern Brazil. It was wet in southern Brazil, extremely dry in northern Brazil. Argentina is actually the wild card here. Argentina kind of snuck by with a decent spring. And then recently into early summer, decent precipitation. And Argentina right now could be this massive production wild card that, didn't. I don't think it got by everybody, but we were so focused on how dry it was in northern Brazil that we didn't kind of see this or didn't give as much attention to what was happening in Argentina. Well, since the start of the new year, it rained a lot in northern Brazil. So I'm talking about the center west region and the northeast region. And the NDVI values have now jumped way up because you put a little water on a crop, it all of a sudden looks much more healthy. And from space, things are looking good. But that doesn't take away the damage that was done early to the crop, which is why you see numbers being reduced. Now, here's what I care about. Right now, over the next 7 days, it's very dry in northern Brazil again. That's not a problem because all the rain they just had. And the dryness is going to help, I think, with some early harvest progress. But I think the concern is going to be how the transition goes at the end of the month and the beginning of February back to wet in northern Brazil. So now we get into this problem, which I've talked about the last few weeks. Wet is actually the problem. So if we stay
Mhm.
wet, then they delay harvest. And if they delay harvest, they delay planting. Delay planting, you push the whole crop calendar back. And this could affect safrinha. And we do worry because there's an El Nino that the safrinha crop could get kind of curtailed on late season moisture in April. So there's still some risk on the table. I think, though, the wild card is Argentina in this overall picture for South America.
Well, you mentioned El Nino, and I want to go there for just a few minutes as well as we watch El Nino and the impacts in South America, the impacts in the US. Are you seeing anything? I know it's early, but with El Nino kind of long range out in terms of spring planting in the US, obviously, we talked about it. Got a lot of this great moisture. That's going to be very helpful as we get to spring. What are some of the early indications you're seeing, though, looking out long range here a couple of months ahead?
I think a lot of us right now are discussing the pace at which El Nino collapses. So if it's got a slow demise, then our chances for most of North America, I mean, maybe not the Canadian prairie as much, but most of the United States of staying wet into spring is relatively high. If it falls off like a rock, and some of the US models are predicting it doing that, then what we're going to watch is drought risk building into the plains first. So I think overall, much of the Midwest, we go back into a regime of concern about tighter windows. And then, I mean, they'll open, we'll get a crop planted, but it's just not this, ideal thing where you get 10 days of dryness and then maybe 2, 3 days of rain and then another 10. I mean, I don't see that happening. I see actually much more frequent systems this upcoming spring. But the big unknown is if El Nino collapses fast, how does that transition into the late spring, early summer temperature and precipitation pattern? There's some indications that would suggest that we maybe divide the country on the Mississippi River again, with drier risks the farther west you go and wetter risks the farther east you go. Now that's very preliminary, but that's just a kind of an analog to what happens when El Ninos fall off. So just pay attention to how quickly, or I'll pay attention to it and tell you about it, how quickly the El Nino collapses. It's slow right now. So it's not as though it just fell off the face of the earth. I think it's going to favor a more slow transition than a fast, which means tighter windows this spring.
Well, and again, we still have time. A lot can change between now and then, but always important to have some sort of idea what we could be expecting here in just a few short months' time. Eric, any other final thoughts for us today? Anything else you're watching around the world, or anything you'd want to reiterate to folks today?
Yeah, I'm watching a bunch of things around the world. Australia's been extremely wet this winter. That's an odd El Nino winter. It's very wet over Indonesia right now. There's not going to be a story about spring drought in Europe, given how much snow and rain they've had as well. And that includes getting all the way over to parts of Ukraine and Russia. So we kind of let that
Mhm.
slide by. But I'll just say this. I think we need one more good push of really cold air in February. There's a lot of reasons for that, for our wheat growers, for just the conditions in the soil, for compaction. We need to get that back. And there's a chance that once we get past the first week of February, this mildness that's coming back in comes to an end and it could go very active again. So don't think that winter's over after we get into next week. But I think we're going to have a interesting February ahead of us.
Well, of course, we'll stay close with you, and folks can find more details ag-wx.com. That's ag-wx.com. They can sign up for Eric's weekly weather newsletter and get more info there. Eric Snodgrass with Nutrient Ag Solutions. Always good to talk to you. Thanks for joining us. We'll talk to you next week.
Sounds good. See you, Jesse.